how is forensic interpretation different than regular human rights documentation? Some of you may have seen about a year and a half ago, the IRCT released a report reviewing 50 random cases of about 2,000 cases of alleged torture and ill treatment that was documented in Belarus. I guess everyone has seen the news about Belarus and the protest that occurred subsequent to the elections or the flawed elections and the re-election of the current, dictator, strongman. So we were asked by local NGOs to review 50 cases, randomly selected of a pool of 2,000, and provide a forensic expertise on them. What does that mean? That means the first level, Georgia and I, and he will speak more in a little bit, but Georgia and I received case files from these 50 cases. What was in the case files? They were interviews, right? There were medical documentation. So many individuals following release from prison and beating went to their doctors and got, doctors' reports. Many of them were severely injured. They got other medical records, so on and so forth. We also received some videos and we received some photographs. And we were asked to sort of review these. So what did we do? Well, the first thing, obviously, that any NGO would do is to review the documents and to compare and contrast all of the stories, right? So what happened in each of these 50 cases? What do we see? What are the patterns? Okay, 80% of, or 90% of people were being detained across 11 cities in 15 different detention facilities. 40% of them alleged that they were suspended, that they were tied and hung or suspended, right? 80% of them were beaten, right? This sounds very normal, like a regular human rights report. 20% of them were electrocuted. People complained about what types of injuries. They were bruised. They had, many of them went to see medical support. 15% of them were hospitalized. Okay, so that is the first level of, let's say, interpretation or analysis that we conduct as a forensic expert. Now, what is the second level of forensic evaluation? In each of the individual cases as well, and I think this is where, there are two different levels. This is where it departs from regular human rights documentation. The first is that in each individual case, we conduct an assessment of the consistency between the individual specific allegations and the existing evidence, right? So in each individual case, the forensic assessment adds to the, let's say, the weight of evidence or the credibility of an individual specific story. So we can say, okay, we have these 50 cases. There is this kind of similarity between all of their stories. There's this kind of similarity between all of their allegations, right? But now in 80% of cases, for example, there is a high level of consistency between the evidence presented to us, both the documentary, right, the medical records, photos and even within the internal story itself, there's an internal consistency that provides strength and evidence from a scientific perspective to the individual story. And in 85% of these stories, I think it was, there's a high level of consistency. In 15% of them, the stories are still consistent, right? So that is the second level of, let's say, forensic expertise, and where it departs from regular human rights documentation. And then from that, there's a third level. What is that third level? The third level is a assessment of all of the evidence together. Now, why is that valuable? Because based on an assessment of the evidence, right, we can look at all of the photographs, for example, separately, and together. We can look at all of the types of injuries, and based merely on the evidence and injuries, then we can make determinations about the pattern and practices or the policies that may be in place. Because, for example, with the Belarus report, we can say that, okay, in 15 detention centers across 11 cities, looking at the injuries that we see, right, the patterns of bruisings are actually virtually identical, right? So each of these individuals, these 50 individuals, had a specific pattern of bruising, actually across their backside, their lower thighs, that is identical. What does this demonstrate? This demonstrates a specific systematic policy of torture and ill treatment, right? That is learned by police stations in Belarus across 15 detention centers across the country. We can then make determinations. We can make statements. Actually, the finding of the report was that there is compelling evidence of a coordinated policy and practice of systemic torture, right? Based on the physical and psychological or the documentary medical evidence that exists, right? So even without knowing, right, the first level of interpretation was comparing all their stories, and the third level of interpretation is comparing all of the evidence. And even without these stories, in fact, without the allegations, we can understand the similarity between the stories and what is being told. And so those are really the three different levels of or forensic perspectives that we can take to evidence that is presented, right? Which makes it, and that's what we mean when we say forensic expertise or forensic evaluation, and why it adds something to regular human rights documentation and human rights investigation.